My husband and I have a strict 50-50 marriage. We split the rent, the bills, and the groceries down to the last cent. But while he's saving thousands for a luxury hiking trip in the Alps, I'm struggling to pay for basic household soap. I realized his disposable income only exists because I'm the one subsidizing his life with my unpaid labor. In the beginning, the arrangement felt like a badge of honor. We were the modern couple, the ones who didn't let traditional gender roles or messy power dynamics touch our relationship. When Mark and I moved in together, we sat at the dining table with a laptop and a shared bank account, dividing our lives into two perfectly equal columns: rent, electricity, internet. Everything was split down to the last cent. At the time, we were earning almost exactly the same, and it felt like the ultimate form of respect. Mark took pride in our system, often telling our friends how we avoided the financial arguments that plagued other marriages because we kept things fair. But as the months turned into years, the definition of fair began to warp. The spreadsheet tracked the big, obvious numbers, but it was blind to the life lived between the lines. Mark saw the mortgage payment leave our account and checked a box in his mind, convinced his contribution to our home was complete. He didn't see the mental energy it took to keep that home running. I was the one who noticed when the fridge was empty, spending my lunch breaks navigating grocery aisles while he was at the gym. I was the one who remembered his mother's birthday, picked out the gift and made sure it was wrapped and sent. I was the one who stayed home for the plumber, losing hours of my own work time while he stayed at the office to secure his year-end bonus. The equality was a ghost. On paper, we were partners. In reality, I was the manager of a household where he was merely a high-paying guest. The first real crack in the illusion happened on a Tuesday evening. I had just finished a 10-hour shift and came home to find Mark sitting on the sofa, scrolling through a mountain bike forum. He looked up, smiled, and asked what was for dinner. I looked at the clean, empty kitchen counters and realized that in his mind, the 50-50 split only applied to the money that left his wallet. It didn't apply to the effort required to put food on his plate. When I told him I was too exhausted to cook and suggested we order something, his first response wasn't a question of how I was feeling. It was a reminder that we had already hit our shared dining out budget for the month. He suggested that if I wanted to order, I should probably use my personal fun money to cover it, since he was perfectly happy eating a bowl of cereal to stay within the lines of our agreement. I stood in the hallway, still wearing my coat, feeling a strange, hollow sensation in my chest. I realized that while we were splitting the bills, I was the only one paying the hidden tax of our marriage. I was exhausted, depleted, and starting to feel like a roommate who was subsidizing his comfortable life with my own dwindling energy. The math was perfect, but the marriage was starting to feel like a trap. The disparity became impossible to ignore when the fun money started to pile up in Mark's corner. Because our essential bills were split down the middle, Mark had a significant amount of cash left over every month. He treated his personal savings like a high score in a video game, watching the numbers climb while mine stagnated. I started to notice the subtle ways he spent that extra wealth. He bought a professional-grade espresso machine for his office, claiming it was a personal investment for his productivity. He upgraded his gym membership to a VIP tier that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. He walked around the house in brand new designer loungewear, while I was still wearing t-shirts from college, because I couldn't justify the expense. When I looked at my own accounts, the math didn't add up to freedom. I was the one paying for the small things that kept us afloat. I bought the new vacuum filters. I paid for the extra cloud storage for our shared photos. I replaced the bathroom rug when it started to mold. Mark never saw these costs because they weren't on the main spreadsheet, so in his mind they didn't exist. The breaking point happened on a Saturday morning when Mark excitedly showed me a brochure for a week-long hiking trip in the Alps. He had already priced it out: flights, gear, and a private guide. He told me he had finally saved enough and was ready to book his spot. I asked him if he had considered how I would afford to go with him. He looked at me with genuine confusion, as if the question itself was illogical. He reminded me that we had discussed our individual savings goals months ago. He said that he had been very disciplined with his spending to make this happen, and that it wouldn't be fair to him if he had to dip into his hard-earned savings to subsidize my trip. He suggested that maybe I could take an extra freelance project or cut back on my shopping to catch up. I looked at the pile of laundry I was about to wash, his laundry, and then at the grocery list I had just finished writing. My shopping consisted of buying his favorite brand of almond, milk, and the expensive detergent he insisted on because he had sensitive skin. I realized then that his discipline was built on the back of my labor. He could save because I managed. He could afford the Alps because I was the one paying the invisible interest on our lives. As he went back to his laptop to look at hiking boots, a cold, sharp realization settled in my chest. He wasn't just being fair with money, he was being greedy with his life. He was perfectly comfortable watching me struggle in the shallows. As long as he got to swim in the deep end. The man sitting across from me didn't see a wife. He saw a financial anchor that allowed him to drift toward whatever luxury he desired, as long as he paid his half of the dock fees. The dynamic shifted from frustrating to dehumanizing. During the second week of November, I had spent the entire morning scrubbing the guest room and prepping the house for his parents' visit. It was hours of physical labor that I didn't bill him for, hours that I took away from my own work projects. Oh no, by the time evening rolled around, a familiar, scratchy heat had settled in my throat. By midnight, I was shivering under the weight of a fever that made my joints feel like they were being crushed. The next morning, Mark stood in the doorway of our bedroom, fully dressed in his crisp gym gear. He looked at me with a detached sort of sympathy, the kind you might give a stranger who tripped on the sidewalk. He told me it was a shame I was sick because he had been looking forward to the dinner I had planned to cook. I asked him, my voice barely a whisper, if he could please go to the pharmacy to get me some flu medicine and maybe pick up some soup from the deli down the street. I was too weak to even stand, let alone drive. He nodded, telling me he'd stop by on his way back from his workout. 2 hours later, he dropped a small plastic bag on my nightstand. Inside were the pills and a container of chicken noodle soup. I thanked him, feeling a small, desperate spark of warmth. Maybe he did care. Maybe the spreadsheet could be pushed aside when things got real. That spark was extinguished 5 minutes later by the familiar chime of my phone. I reached for it with shaking hands, expecting a sweet text or a get-well-soon message. Instead, it was a Venmo request. Flumeds plus soup plus 50% off gas for the detour. 22/18. I stared at the screen, the blue light stinging my eyes. He hadn't just charged me for the items. He had calculated the mileage for the 3-block detour he had to take to the pharmacy. He had treated a basic act of care for his sick wife as a business expense that needed to be reimbursed. When he came back into the room to grab his car keys, I asked him with a terrifying, calm clarity if he truly felt that charging me for gas while I was bedridden was fair. He didn't even flinch. He leaned against the dresser and explained his logic with the patience of a teacher speaking to a slow student. He said that our agreement was 50-50 on all shared expenses, and since the medicine and soup were only for me, he was actually being generous by not charging me for his time. He argued that if he started making exceptions, the whole system would fall apart, and we'd end up like those unhappy couples who fight about money. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see the man I loved. I saw a creditor. I saw someone who was so obsessed with the fairness of the math that he had completely discarded the fairness of a partnership. He told me to just pay it when I felt better and walked out to go meet his friends for a hike. I didn't pay it. I lay there in the dark, the soup getting cold on the nightstand, and I began to realize that if I was being treated like a business partner, it was time I started looking at the balance sheet. I had been giving away 100% of my heart and 100% of my labor for a 50% stake in a life that was bankrupting me. If he wanted a marriage based on invoices, I was about to send him the biggest one of his life. I didn't say a word when the fever finally broke. I didn't complain, and I didn't bring up the Venmo request again. I simply went into the home office and opened a blank document. If Mark wanted to live by the spreadsheet, I was going to show him the true cost of his lifestyle. I spent the afternoon researching. I looked up the hourly rates for a professional deep cleaner, a personal chef, a laundress, and a social secretary.
I calculated the market value of the 4 hours.
I spent every Sunday meal prepping for the week. I added the management fee for tracking our household, inventory, and the administrative cost of handling his parents' travel arrangements. When Mark came home, he found me sitting at the kitchen table. The house was cold. There was no smell of roasting chicken, no warm lights, and the pile of his gym laundry from 3 days ago was still sitting exactly where he had dropped it on the bathroom floor. He asked what was for dinner, his tone light but tinged with an edge of expectation. I handed him a printed sheet of paper. It wasn't a grocery list. It was an invoice. I had itemized every domestic task I had performed over the last month that fell outside a 50-50 financial agreement. I told him that since we were strictly transactional now, my labor had a price. I pointed to the bottom line, which showed that after subtracting my half of the rent, he owed me over $2,000 for the month of October alone. Mark laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. He told me I was being ridiculous and that housework doesn't count because it's just part of living in a home. I didn't laugh back. I told him that if the housework didn't count, then I would no longer be doing it. I explained that from this moment forward, I was officially on strike. I would pay my 50% of the rent and utilities, but I would only be cleaning my half of the house, washing my own clothes and cooking only for myself. His face shifted from amusement to irritation. He asked how that was supposed to work, especially with his parents coming in 2 days. He reminded me that he had already paid for his half of their flight. I told him that hosting his parents was 100% his responsibility. I said that if he wanted the guest room cleaned and meals prepared for them, he could either do it himself or hire the professionals whose rates I had used for my invoice. The nice guy mask finally slipped. He called me petty. He told me I was destroying the fairness of our marriage over a few dollars and some soup. I looked at the designer watch on his wrist, the one he bought with his extra money, and told him that fairness died the moment. He requested $14 from his sick wife. I told him he had a choice. We could sit down and redefine what a partnership meant, or he could start paying his bills in full, starting with the laundry on the floor. I walked into the bedroom and locked the door, leaving him alone in the cold, silent kitchen with nothing but his spreadsheet to keep him company. The weekend of his parents' visit was a masterclass in uncomfortable silence. Mark had spent the previous night frantically trying to clean the guest room himself, but he lacked the invisible knowledge I had accumulated over years. He couldn't find the spare linens because I hadn't told him they were in the vacuum-sealed bags under the bed. He didn't know how to get the scent of mildew out of the guest towels because he had never bothered to learn which cycle to use. When his parents arrived, the house felt like a battlefield with invisible tripwires. Mark tried to play the role of the attentive host, but he was drowning. By Saturday afternoon, he was exhausted. He had spent 4 times what I usually spent on groceries because he didn't know how to shop sales or use coupons. He had burned the roast because he didn't realize the oven ran 5 degrees hot. His mother pulled me aside in the kitchen while Mark was struggling to fix the dishwasher he had overloaded. She asked me in a low, concerned voice why the house felt so tense. She noticed I was eating a separate salad while they had the expensive, charred takeout Mark had eventually surrendered to ordering. I didn't lie to her, but I didn't yell either. I simply told her that Mark and I were exploring a strictly 50-50 lifestyle to ensure everything was fair. I explained that since I hadn't contributed to the cost of their dinner, it wouldn't be fair for me to eat it. The look on her face was one of pure horror. She looked at her son, the man she raised to be a gentleman, and then back at me. After they left on Sunday evening, the explosion finally happened. Mark slammed the front door and turned to me, his face flushed with embarrassment. He told me I had humiliated him. He said that making his parents witness our petty financial dispute was the lowest thing I had ever done. I didn't back down. I asked him why the truth was humiliating. If his 50-50 system was so superior and fair, why was he ashamed to show it to the people he loved most? He went quiet then, the anger draining out of him and being replaced by a stubborn, defensive pout. He told me he just wanted things to go back to normal. I told him that normal was dead. I told him that I realized I could afford to live on my own quite comfortably, but I couldn't afford to keep living with a man who viewed my existence as a line item to be audited. I gave him a choice. We sell the house and split the proceeds. 50-50, just like he always wanted, or we sit down right now, delete every spreadsheet, and start treating this marriage like a sanctuary instead of a business. I told him that in a real marriage there are no invoices for soup. There are no gas calculations for a pharmacy run. There is only us. Mark looked at his phone, then at the empty, messy kitchen, and finally at me. For the first time in years, he didn't look at me like a partner in a firm. He looked at me like a man who was realized. He was about to lose the only thing in his life that actually had value, something that no amount of disposable income could ever buy back. He sat down at the table, pushed his laptop aside, and finally, for the first time, he asked me what I needed to feel safe again.